Well, good morning, everybody. One of the questions I often get asked is, what does it really cost to live in Japan or in Kyoto? And so today I thought I would go over what my budget and what my expenses were for the month of February 2023. This is kind of, I thought, a good mix of what I actually spent versus what my budget was, and would be a good indicator for people that want to see what I would call I don't want to say a normal lifestyle, but an average lifestyle would be. It's certainly not the low end. You're not living off of cup ramen and finding the cheapest way to do things. But you're also not eating out every night and doing the most expensive things. So this is what I would consider probably what an average lifestyle, at least for me, as someone who's coming from America, kind of wanted to live when I was living in Kyoto. Now, a couple of notes before we get started. I'm going to talk about, and you're going to see prices both in US dollars and in Japanese yen. The conversion rate during February was about 130 yen to the US dollar. So obviously that's going to fluctuate daily, monthly, yearly. So when you're looking at these numbers, just realize that's what that is, and that if you are looking at doing something yourself in the future, you may want to take that into account because it can be a big difference. My dollars here are in US dollars. I'm coming from California in the United States. So that's what my standard of living, my costs, and kind of what I'm comparing everything to. So with all of that in mind, let's get started. My first budget was clothing. Now, I know a lot of people would probably go, I'm going to bring my clothes with me, which is great. And we did. We brought most of ours with us. But that was most of them. And what we found was that we really weren't prepared for all of the seasons in Japan, especially coming from California, where it tends to be a little warmer and a little cooler, and that's about it. We don't get all four seasons where I'm from. So we were buying things like warmer clothing to deal with the cold winter. We actually had a blizzard while I was there. And the summers were very hot and very humid. So we bought some different types of clothing there in Japan that were a little bit more suited to the climate. My budget for that was only about $20 a month, not a lot. And as you can see in the month of February, I didn't spend any money. I didn't need to. I'd already spent and bought everything that I needed for that month. Communication here, this is really what this is a cell phone budget. Now, my cell phone budget was 60 US dollars. And as you can see, I spent about 160 US dollars. And there's a reason for that. And that is I had two cell phones, basically plans at the time. I kept my US AT&T international plan for a couple of reasons. One was all of my texting and phone calls and my US connections were still using that US phone number, and I didn't want to lose it knowing that I was going to be going back to the US at one point. So I wanted to keep that number. Also, by making my US phone my hotspot, I was able to still stream my US-based shows. So if you have Disney or Netflix or Crunchyroll, if you're into anime, having that US-based phone number allowed me to keep and watch all of the shows that I wanted to watch. And then additionally, I did have a Japanese cell phone plan. I used mobile. It's really, I want to say it's meant for long term. It's more of a short term. They send you a chip in the mail, your eSIM chip. You put it in your phone, you get a phone number, it's a Japanese phone number. It worked great, it came with data, but I used both, and I found that to be very convenient for my time there. So when I was making my budget originally, I hadn't thought about that, I really hadn't known all about that. So that is something for people to consider when they are gonna come over, if they're gonna come over for a shorter period of time, or if they're not sure if they're really gonna stay. Just plan for that. Dining out. Dining out's a big one. This is eating out. So my budget was 100 US, and as you can see, I spent 161 US. This number fluctuates a lot month to month. February, I only had basically one more left in Japan, one more month left. I was heading home at the end of March. And so I was eating out a little bit more often than I normally did. I kind of wanted to go back to my favorite restaurants and try the things that I had wanted to try. And I was trying some new restaurants, the ones that were on my list. So, and for a lot of people, this can be very an expensive portion of living in Japan, because so many people of us who go to Japan love the food, and the food was amazing. So plan accordingly for dining out. Yes, it is cheaper than the US. I would say considerably cheaper than the US. Most of my meals were under $20 US. In fact, a lot of them were under $10 US. So, and for good meals. And so I really keep a hard look at that when you're coming. How much do you really plan to eat out and enjoy the food? Education. This is kind of a set expense. So I was going to language school in Japan, and it's expensive. Anyone planning to learn Japanese language in Japan, it's going to be expensive. Language schools are $7,000 to $8,000 a year for a full year, 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, plus homework. So this number, the 650, represents about what it cost me for the whole year. Now, obviously, you have to pay that up front. So this was an expense I already had, but it was an expense. It was something I had to account for. And if you're gonna come over on an education visa, it is something I definitely recommend. Not only you account for what you've spent already, but what you may be spending in the future. So if you're gonna spend a second year or a third year, if you're going to a language school, or you're gonna stay there and end up going to university or a trade or vocational school, that's definitely something you want to keep in mind. Entertainment. Entertainment is just that. It's the things I did for fun. Most of the time, that would have been things like Netflix, Disney Plus, those online streaming services. If I bought a movie, usually through iTunes. I did look at going to the movie theaters there in Japan, never did, but that's exactly what that category was for. It's kind of for the little bit of fun things that I was allowing myself to do. And again, I was keeping some of those streaming services from the US because I would tether through my phone. And since my phone still had an international plan associated, because it was a US phone number, I was able to stream those US shows there in Japan, which I really enjoyed, because it just gave me that taste of home and let me keep up on the shows that maybe people back at home were still watching. Gifts. So my budget for gifts was 50 US. And so these are not only birthdays, they also account for Christmas. They also account for souvenirs you want to bring back from your trip. So that's what that budget was. So don't forget when you're planning that. A lot of times I don't think people do. I see a lot of bare bone budgets, and they're kind of forgetting some of the daily things that we have in our normal lives. And we do give gifts to our loved ones and friends, and we do have souvenirs we want to bring back. So just plan accordingly for that one as well. Groceries. This is also a very debatable topic. My budget was 350 US, cheaper than what I was paying in the US. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Food in the US is very expensive right now. So for me, I spent about $260 for the month of February. And again, that is not eating, cup of noodles, instant ramen. I'm having bacon and eggs on the weekends. I have drinks a couple nights a week at home, whether it's a beer or trying a new sake. It's making okonomiyaki at home. I'm making curry at home, sandwiches. This also accounts for my bakery visits. So for those of you that don't know, Kyoto has a lot of bakeries. Fell in love with them. So I got my bread fresh from the bakery every 2 or 3 days. And I usually ended up picking up a dessert at the same time. So you may find that you may want to do that. One of the benefits of hitting a bakery for fresh bread every day is they usually don't have all of the preservatives. They're much more natural. And it was amazingly delicious. I have to say that the bread that I got at Koneria Bakery in Kyoto was the best bread I have ever had my entire life, and I loved it. Now that I'm back in the US now, I do miss it immensely. US bread just doesn't hold up to Japanese bread. It was amazing. Uh, so, so think about that. Yes, you can eat cheaper. Obviously, I know people that have, they do have cup ramen, instant noodles. They find they'll live off of onigiri at the konbinis. Look closely. Again, this is trying to be an average budget. I wasn't trying to go there on the cheapest way. I also wasn't not having a budget and eating whatever I wanted. In fact, I never had Kobe beef when I was there. I didn't have Wagyu beef while I was there. A lot of the expensive things I didn't have. Although I did try the $20 grapes while I was there. Not bad. Household. Household is kind of an innocuous one. I budgeted $50 for this. This budget was for things I needed around the house. So if I needed to buy curtains or dishes or plates or some of those everyday houseware items, that's where that budget was. And so while you're living there, usually you're going to need something. You're going to need plateware, you're going to need a vacuum to clean your place, that type of thing. And it's something, again, you need to plan for because it is a real expense, and a lot of people do forget it when I see people talking about budgets online. And it was one that I kind of threw in the last minute when I was doing mine, and I'm really glad I did because I moved 3 times. I was first in an Airbnb Kiyomachiya, and then I was in a rental house, and then I was in an apartment. So, internet, this internet expense, which was, I budgeted roughly $50 a month, and it ended up being about $60 a month. And that was just because I didn't know what my plan options were going to be. In the apartment where I was living, it was already wired for internet, and that was the company I went with because then I didn't have to pay to have another company come and install internet. And that is $50. The $61 you see there was what I paid for the month of February. Now I have to say that was fast internet. If I recall, I think it was 50 megabytes or megabits per second. Upload and download. So it was very fast. So when I was uploading photos or movies or sending things like that, it was very fast. I love the internet there. It was actually faster than where I am in California right now, even though it's the same price. So even though I'm paying the same amount in both countries, the internet was faster when I was in Japan, and they're both fiber optics. So there you go. Medical. So medical, for those that don't know, Japan has universal healthcare. Everyone has to be in it if you're a resident of Japan. And so that $20 was my estimate of what I thought I was going to have to pay for my monthly fees for them. You can either pay it every month, they'll send you a bill, the little stubs, and then you can go and pay them at the convenience store, or you can pay it all at one time. And so that doesn't include, if you actually have to have a procedure there, if something happens. I can tell you from experience, I did have a procedure when I was in Japan. It did involve some minor surgery. It only cost me $300, and it was great medical care. So again, something that I don't see people planning for, and I really think they need to. It's important. It's something you have to do. You have to have the medical care, the social medical care that they have there, but it is good. So it is something you do want to look at. Mortgage, rent. It's rent, it's not mortgage. I didn't buy a place, so please don't get that. As I said earlier, when I was in Japan for the year, I lived in 3 places. I lived in a Kiyomachiya that I rented through Airbnb. I lived in a private house that I rented from somebody, and then my last stay was in an apartment. And that was intentional. The reason I was doing that was I wanted to see all of Kyoto, and I wanted to move around to the different neighborhoods and see what things were like. For the month of February, this is where I was living in my apartment. And so my budget was roughly $800, and that is about what I spent. So I was very fortunate in that. And I have to tell you, it was an amazing apartment for $800. I was on the 5th floor of my apartment building, which was the top floor. I was across the street from the Kyoto Imperial Palace, so I had amazing views to the east, the north, and the west. I loved watching sunrise and sunset. You could see the clouds roll in. It was an amazing apartment that I loved. It was a one, in the US, we'd call it a one bedroom. In Japan, it was a 1 LDK, so one living room, dining room, kitchen. It was an amazing apartment. I loved it. It was newer. The building was only about 10 years old. Very conveniently located to transportation, public transportation, which is very important in Kyoto. That is mostly what most people use. If you're not walking or taking your bike, you're taking the trains or the subways or the buses. Now, as I've said earlier, there are cheaper ways. I know people who lived in a share house and they were only spending about $400 a month. And sometimes that includes the utilities depending on the share house you're in. I also know you can spend more than that depending on the size of your family, you're single, what you really want to do. So there are a lot of options. So look around. I do recommend, if you're coming here for the first time or going to Japan for the first time, for the first month or two, try and rent a place short term. So an Airbnb. Hotels can be kind of expensive. That's why I like the Airbnb route, or do a share house. The reason being is that for most apartments in Japan, they come with a 2-year lease. So if you're not going to be there for 2 years, if you have to break your lease early because you're only going to be there for a year, you may end up having to pay a penalty. Some people have to pay 2 or 3 months penalty rent in order to get out of their lease. And renting an apartment can be expensive. You have your deposit, sometimes first and second month's rent. You have something called key money, which is what they use for changing out the keys. It's also what they call a gift. You may pay agency fees because almost all of the apartments go through an agency. And then there's a cleaning fee. So your startup costs to get into an apartment can run 4 to 6 months rent right up front. Now, not all of the apartments are like that, but a lot of them are. And if you're trying to find apartments from overseas before you're in Japan, it's especially difficult. I was very fortunate, because I was already in Japan, I found an apartment realtor who spoke English, who was very helpful, loved working with her. When I go back, I hope to work with her again, and was very helpful. Now, some apartments will do short-term leases. They will do 3 to 6 months. Some of them come furnished. Some of them don't have the lease where they'll charge you to break your lease early, but a lot of them do. I'm going to say the vast majority. So if you wait to go to Japan before you sign that lease and really settle in, I think you're going to find that you'll find a place that you want, in the location you want, at the price you want, instead of trying to do it before you go over and being rushed and really not knowing everything. Other was my catch-all category in case something came up. I just didn't know where to put it. I didn't budget for it. Probably should have. But in the month of February, I didn't have anything, so it wasn't a big deal. Postage. Postage is just that, sending packages and letters either in Japan or back home to the States. I would send cards and presents or whatnot. So again, something that most people don't budget for. I think you need to. As you can see, I only budgeted $10 a month. I spent 85 cents. And that 85 cents, I believe, was actually just to send a card from Japan to the US. Boxes, if you're going to send some gifts or whatnot, they will be more expensive. Not as expensive as sending gifts from the US to Japan. It's definitely cheaper to send stuff from Japan to the US. But it is something that you probably want to plan for, because you probably are going to send some stuff back and forth. Taxes. So taxes are 0, but if you're going to be here more than a year, I think it's important that you plan for them. If you get a job in Japan, the taxes will probably be taken out, so you don't have to worry about it. If you are earning income from the US while living in Japan, it is taxable. You really need to do some research on tax laws between the US and Japan. Both countries tax you. The US is one of the few countries that taxes its residents even if you're no longer living in that country. So be aware of that. You may have to pay taxes in Japan and in the US. Taxes in both countries tend to be high depending on how much you're earning. So it is something to consider, work with an accountant. I would definitely find someone who's an expert on this to help you out with it, but it is something, again, you need to plan for because it may come out of pocket for you. Transportation. So I'll talk about transportation and travel kind of at the same time. Transportation were my daily costs. So these were the bus, the train, the subway, just going around town for my daily life activities, going to school, going shopping, going somewhere that I needed to go. As you can see, I budgeted $100 a month before I went to Japan, just in case I had to take the bus every day to school and back. And at one point when I was living in the rental house down by Kyoto Station, I was taking the train every day. I was taking it to and from school. But for the month of February, I was already living in the apartment. I was walking to school. It was a 40-minute walk. I loved walking to school. I did occasionally ride my bike, but most days I walked. I loved to walk because I walked along a river for about half of it, and I loved enjoying the architecture around Kyoto as I was walking to school. So I found it very enjoyable. Where travel is my travel for fun budget. This is my sightseeing budget, and you're seeing that budget of $700. And I know most people got to be thinking, why is that so high? Two reasons. One was I was budgeting for trips back to the US for visits. So going back at Christmas to spend time with family, and also for traveling around Japan. I knew I was only going to be in Japan for a limited amount of time, and I didn't want to go and spend all of my time in Kyoto, although you could never go wrong doing that. I see a lot of people who want to go see all of these places when they come to visit for 2 weeks. And maybe if you're coming as a traveler and you want to do something, my best advice that I could give you is to slow down your schedule, spend more time in each location. There is so much to see that are not the major tourist spots in each city that in some cases are a lot better than the major tourist spots, and you really get a feel for the city and the place you're in. So I had planned to do a decent amount of travel, and I did. While I was living in Kyoto, I visited Osaka and I visited Nara, both of which are very close and not very expensive. I had planned to do weekend trips to Tokyo, which if you're talking a round trip on the Shinkansen is over $200, plus hotel fees, which is what I would have put in that transportation budget or that travel budget. So that could add up very quickly. And I took a ferry trip from Kyoto to Sapporo during the summer. So there's the ferry ride up there, the hotels in Hokkaido, and then the Shinkansen from Hokkaido all the way back to Kyoto. So that was something that I really wanted to do. I really wanted to see as much of Japan as I could while I was there. So again, this is one of those ones that can be cut if you're trying to go to Japan on a smaller budget. And if you're going to live there long term, it's probably a lot easier to cut because you won't be in quite a rush to see everything. You can save up more money, only do 1 or 2 trips a year, as opposed to trying to fit 5, 6, or 7 trips in a year. Utilities. So I'll talk about utilities probably all together, even though I have them broke up separately. I have electricity, gas, and water. And those US budget estimates of $75 for electricity, $50 for gas, and $50 for water were a ballpark that I got while watching YouTube videos still back here in the US. I saw some that were a lot lower, and I saw some that were a little higher. But you'll notice that even though I budgeted $75 for electricity, I actually spent $120, and there's a good reason for that. For the month of February, Tokyo had a blizzard. It was their first blizzard in 10 years. I think it snowed off and on for about 3 days. I have a great video on that if you want to see it. Kyoto is absolutely beautiful with the snow. but the heater runs off electricity, not gas. So the heater was running basically almost the whole time I was home. So for about, I think, a week there, I don't think it got much above 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, which is, 33, 34, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So the heater was working a lot, and it was getting down into about the -8 Celsius, I think, for a couple nights. So you're talking closer to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. We did get warnings about pipes freezing, and making sure that that didn't happen, and precautions to take. So my electricity was higher in February. In fact, that was the highest bill I had because of that cold snap. Now, your electricity bills are going to be highest in winter because you're running the heater, and then also in summer because you're going to be running the air conditioning. And let me tell you, you're probably going to be running the air conditioning a lot during the summer. It gets very hot, very humid during July, August, and September. Even June can get hot. It still cools. It can be a little cool, but those 3 months were very hot. We ran the air conditioning all the time while we were home. It was just, even at night, it wouldn't cool down to maybe 82 or 83 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was pretty warm. Those are going to be your biggest ones. Again, if you're in a place like a share house, you may end up paying less because it may be bulk, like it's part of your rent, but also realize you may not have control over the thermostat. That could be set by the share house you're living in. And one of the things I did notice was that the thermostats in Japan tended to be set higher than here in the US, at least here in California, where a lot of times people have the thermostat set to 70, 72 degrees in summer. A lot of times they were 78 or 80 degrees there in Kyoto, depending on where we were. So something to consider. My water was 50. That was about spot on. If you're taking showers and baths every day, like a lot of people in Japan do, you may be taking more than one. That's probably where most of that water is coming from. And then gas, as far as I know, the only gas I had was from the gas water heater. Most of the water heaters that I've seen are on-demand water heaters. So then here in the US, we have big 40, 50-gallon tanks that are constantly kept warm. In Japan, they use the on-demand ones, so the water doesn't heat up until you turn on the hot water. Very efficient, very nice. So that was, my budget was 50, I spent 56. So I was pretty happy about those numbers, especially with that hot water bill or that gas bill. That's what my showers were. And I was taking some longer showers in February because it was so cold. I did need to warm up. So my whole budget for the month of February was about $3,265. I ended up spending only $2,700. Don't let that fool you though, because some of those are planned out over the whole year. Like I said, my travel budget was pretty low in February. We had the budget, we had the cold snap. I didn't do a lot of traveling that wasn't local during the month of February. Some of those were in other months. So you really need to plan for them over the entire year, because you may have one month where you're spending $3,000 on travel because you're flying back to your home country, or you're taking that long trip to wherever it is you're going. So make sure you plan accordingly when you think about that. And that wraps up my finances. Like I said earlier, there are cheaper ways to do this if you really want to. There are also more expensive ways. So find what works best for you to live the lifestyle you want to live within your financial means, whether you're going to be living off of savings, whether you're going to have an income in the US or your home country, or you're going to get a job in Japan and live off what you're making there in Japan. So I hope this video was helpful for people to see what I would consider an average budget would be. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comment section below. I will respond to them. And thank you very much.